Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Unseen Wisdom, the show that helps you cut through the noise and get to the heart of complex topics. Don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, and subscribe to stay tuned for more insightful dives into the issues that matter. Today we're taking you straight to South Africa to explore the reaction to President Cyril Ramaphosa's recent State of the Nation address. We've got some fascinating source material that reveals a pretty strong undercurrent of skepticism, especially when it comes to the government's economic plans.
Yeah, what's really interesting here is the sheer volume of distrust directed at Ramaphosa's promises. It's not just coming from opposition parties, but also from influential groups like labor unions, who are traditionally aligned with the ruling party. We're going to take a closer look at why that is, focusing on the perspective of the National Union of Mine Workers, NUM, which happens to be the largest affiliate of the Congress of South African Trade Unions.
So we're talking about a union that's deeply embedded in the labor movement and carries a lot of weight. Their take on things is bound to be insightful. Before we get into their critique, can you give us a quick rundown of what Ramaphosa actually laid out in his address?
Sure, on the surface, his plans seem pretty ambitious and optimistic. He announced a massive 940 billion rand investment in infrastructure, which he claims will create a ripple effect of job creation. He also emphasized collaboration with the private sector, particularly in renewable energy and overhauling the country's rail system. And he even set a target of 3% GDP growth. Sounds promising, right?
It does sound promising,
Wow.
but as we know, the devil's often in the details. That's where I'm guessing the skepticism comes in. What's NUM's take on all of this?
Well, they had a pretty mixed reaction. They acknowledged some positive aspects, but
Yeah.
also voiced some serious concerns about the feasibility and potential downsides of these plans, particularly when it comes to job creation, public-private partnerships, and the National Development Plan, or NDP.
Let's start with the job creation piece. Ramaphosa make a big deal about the infrastructure investment leading to more jobs. What's NUM's issue with that?
Their president, Mike Shang, didn't mince words. He basically said that there's a history of companies receiving government subsidies for job creation, but then there's no real accountability to ensure they actually deliver. He specifically called out the Youth Employment Service, or YIS program, as an example where companies seem to benefit financially without actually boosting employment or retaining workers.
There's this disconnect between the government's rhetoric about job creation and what's actually happening on the ground.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, Shingunj points out the glaring contradiction of a high vacancy rate in the public sector. He's essentially asking, why aren't these open positions being filled with qualified young people if the government is serious about tackling youth unemployment?
That's a really good point. It raises questions about where the government's priorities truly lie. Okay, so we've got this skepticism around job creation. What about public-private partnerships?
Shingunj acknowledges that they can be useful, but he's concerned about the profit motive of private companies, especially when they're involved in delivering essential services like electricity and water. His argument is that prioritizing profit over people could lead to unaffordable tariffs for those who can least afford it, particularly in rural communities. And he uses a very concrete example to illustrate this point. Eskom's unbundling and the subsequent rise in electricity costs. If you've been following South African news at all, you know that Eskom's struggles have had a direct impact on people's wallets, with many struggling to keep up with rising energy bills.
That's a really powerful example.
Yeah.
Because it shows how these policies can have very real consequences for ordinary citizens. It's not just some abstract economic theory. It's hitting people where it hurts, in their pocketbooks.
Exactly, and it taps into this broader fear that essential services are becoming increasingly out of reach for many South Africans.
Okay, so we've covered job creation and public-private partnerships. What's NUM's take on the National Development Plan? That's been touted as the roadmap to economic recovery, right?
Right, but Xinjiang is pretty skeptical about its ambitious GDP growth targets, pointing out that those goals have been repeatedly revised downwards over the years. And it's not that he's completely dismissing the NDP, he's actually raising some fundamental questions about its approach.
I'm curious to hear what those questions are. What doesn't he like about the NDP's approach?
Well, he argues that the plan's austerity measures, coupled with the government's inability to address issues like investment strikes and capital flight, make those rosy growth targets pretty unrealistic. He's basically saying that you can't just set these ambitious goals without tackling the underlying structural issues that are holding the economy back.
So it's like putting a bandage on a broken bone. You're addressing the symptoms, but not the root cause.
That's a great way to put it. And I think what ties all of Shingish's critiques together is this deep-seated lack of trust in the government's ability to deliver on its promises. There's this sense that there's a huge disconnect between the rhetoric we hear from politicians and the lived realities of so many South Africans.
It's that classic gap between words and actions. And it seems like that gap is especially wide when it comes to economic issues.
It is, and that's why the skepticism surrounding Ramaphosa's address is so significant. It's not just a few disgruntled voices on the fringes. It's coming from powerful groups like NUM, who are traditionally aligned with the ruling party. This suggests that Ramaphosa has a real uphill battle ahead of him. If he wants to restore trust and convince people that his economic plans will actually lead to tangible improvements in their lives.
So what would it take for him to bridge that trust deficit? Is it even possible at this point?
It's definitely a tough challenge. He can't just rely on grand pronouncements and flashy investment figures. He needs to demonstrate a genuine commitment to addressing the root causes of South Africa's economic woes. And that means tackling issues like inequality, unemployment, and lack of access to basic services.
Those are huge systemic issues. Where would he even begin?
Well, for starters, he needs to make sure that policies aimed at job creation actually deliver. And that might mean taking a closer look at programs like YES and figuring out why they haven't been as effective as they were supposed to be.
It sounds like accountability is a key piece of the puzzle here. He needs to ensure that companies receiving government subsidies are actually creating sustainable jobs, not just lining their own pockets.
Absolutely. And when it comes to public-private partnerships, he needs to find a way to balance the need for investment with the need to protect essential services from becoming unaffordable for ordinary citizens. The Eskom example clearly shows that prioritizing profit over people can have disastrous consequences.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, where private investment can help improve infrastructure and service delivery, without leading to price hikes that make those services inaccessible to a large segment of the population.
Right. And perhaps most importantly, he needs to address the concerns about the National Development Plan. If he wants people to buy into this roadmap for economic recovery, he needs to show that he's willing to tackle the structural issues that are hindering real progress.
That means going beyond austerity measures and finding ways to stimulate investment, create a more equitable distribution of wealth, and address the root causes of poverty and unemployment.
It's a tall order, but it's essential if South Africa wants to break free from the cycle of economic stagnation and build a more prosperous future for all its citizens.
It sounds like Ramaphosa is facing an uphill battle here. He's trying to project this image of optimism and progress. But the people on the ground, the ones who are supposed to benefit from these plans, aren't buying it.
And this isn't just about economics, it's about trust. It's about whether people believe that their government is truly working in their best interests.
So the big question is, can Ramaphosa bridge this trust deficit and deliver on his promises? Or will South Africa continue to grapple with these deep-seated economic challenges?
That's something we'll have to keep a close eye on. But I think this deep dive has highlighted a crucial point. Real progress requires more than just words and investment figures. It requires a fundamental shift in mindset, a commitment to putting people first, and a willingness to tackle the structural inequalities that continue to hold South Africa back.
It's a reminder that economic policies aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They have real-world impacts on people's lives. And if those impacts aren't positive, then something needs to change.
Exactly, and it's not just up to the government to make those changes. It requires a collective effort from all sectors of society. Businesses, labor unions, civil society organizations, and ordinary citizens all need to play a role in shaping a more equitable and sustainable economic future for South Africa.
This has been a really eye-opening look at the complexities of South Africa's economic landscape. We've seen the optimism, the skepticism, and the urgent need for real, tangible change. What's clear is that the journey ahead is far from straightforward. It will require dialogue, collaboration, and a genuine commitment to addressing the concerns of all South Africans.
And it's a journey worth taking because the stakes are high. The well-being of millions of people depends on whether South Africa can find a path to sustainable and inclusive economic growth.
We'll definitely be keeping an eye on this story as it unfolds, and we encourage you to do the same. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. Because the more we understand the challenges, the better equipped we'll be to find solutions.
And remember, the unseen wisdom is all about helping you navigate those complexities and make sense of the world around you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another insightful exploration of a topic that matters. Until then, keep seeking the unseen wisdom.